By the time dessert came out, I had already fixed a broken patio chair, talked Gwen's uncle through reconnecting his Bluetooth speaker, and located a missing casserole dish that had somehow ended up in the coat closet. No one asked me to do any of that. I just did it because that's what I do at Gwen Calloway's family gatherings. I show up, I make myself useful, and I leave feeling like I belong there, in a way I can't quite explain to myself. At 11 o'clock on a drive home alone. Gwen and I had been friends for almost 7 years. Long enough that her mom saved me a plate without asking. Long enough that her younger brother texted me separately when he needed advice he didn't want to go to their dad for. Long enough that I knew the door to the back bathroom stuck unless you pushed with your shoulder, and that Gwen always put her phone face down when something was bothering her, even if she was smiling. It was her parents' anniversary party. 32 years. Her mom had made it a whole production, the kind where the backyard gets strung with lights, and everyone brings a dish, and someone inevitably cries during the toast. I had driven 40 minutes to be there. I had brought wine and a card. Gwen had texted me that morning to say it meant a lot that I was coming, and I had stared at that text longer than I should have, before typing back, of course. She was wearing this dark green dress that made everything around her look a little muted by comparison. Her hair was down, which was rare. She usually kept it pulled back at events like this, the way people do when they're managing something. But tonight, she looked less like she was managing and more like she was actually there. "You found the casserole dish," she said, coming up behind me near the kitchen counter. "Coat closet." She stared at me. "Why was it in the coat closet?" "Your aunt said she needed a flat surface to sign a birthday card." I did not ask further questions. Gwen pressed her lips together and took the dish from my hands. Her fingers brushed mine on the handoff, just for a second, and she didn't seem to notice. I noticed enough for both of us. Her older brother Neil came through the kitchen behind her, pointed at me with a bottle of beer and said, "Hey, is this guy ever not here?" "Careful," Gwen said. "He found the casserole dish. He gets to stay." He was going to stay anyway. Neil winked at me and went back outside. I didn't know what to do with that, so I opened a drawer looking for the serving spoon. I already knew was in the second one from the left. The party got louder as it got later, the way parties do when the older guests start leaving and the cousins start opening bottles that weren't originally on the table. Gwen's mom gave a speech that made 3 people cry. Her dad dipped her mom during the last slow song they played from a phone propped on a speaker by the fence. And everyone cheered, and Gwen laughed from beside me. And I wanted to stay in that exact second for longer than it lasted. Her cousin Britt was the one who started it. Britt was 24, freshly emboldened by 2 glasses of something pink, and had the particular confidence of someone who believes honesty is a personality trait. She had been watching Gwen and me from across the patio, the way people watch a situation they've already made up their mind about. At some point, I ended up near the cooler refilling drinks, and Britt materialized next to me, with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting. "Can I say something?" she said. "You're going to regardless." She pointed at me. "See, that's the thing. You do this." "Do what?" "The deflect with a joke thing." She tilted her head toward where Gwen was helping her mom wrap up leftover bread. "She does it too. You both do it so much. I'm surprised either of you ever says anything real." I handed her a soda she hadn't asked for. "It's a party, Britt." "Ah, I know it's a party. That's why I'm saying it now, when you can't make it weird and leave." She looked at me steadily. "Do you know that she turned down a date last month? Guy was perfectly nice. Checked every box she says she has. She went on one dinner, and that was it. People go on one dinner all the time." "Yeah, but when I asked her about it, she said." Britt paused, and I could see her making a decision. She said being around him felt like work, and then I asked her what not work felt like, and she didn't answer out loud. But she looked at the window. I didn't say anything. Her apartment faces west, Britt said. You live west of her. I set down the drink I'd been holding. That's a stretch, maybe. She shrugged. But it's a stretch I've been sitting on for about 2 years. So. Gwen's voice came from across the patio. Britt, can you help me with the dessert table? Britt looked at me one more time, then walked away, without finishing whatever she was going to say next. Which was probably for the best. And probably not. The dessert table got sorted. The last of the older guests left with foil-wrapped plates and long goodbyes. Gwen's dad fell asleep in the big chair on the porch, while her mom sat beside him with her shoes off, not waking him. Gwen watched them from the kitchen doorway for a moment, and I stood close enough that I could see her expression go soft, in a way it didn't usually do around people. 32 years, she said quietly. Yeah. My dad still holds her hand when they walk through parking lots. She said he's done it since their first date. Just reaches over. I didn't answer because there wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been either too small or too much. Britt came back into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter with the expression of someone pretending not to be thinking very hard. Neil and his girlfriend had moved out to the fire pit. Gwen's mom and dad were still on the porch. The kitchen was quieter now, just the three of us. The overhead light that was slightly too bright, and whatever Britt was about to say. She said it to Gwen. She did not say it quietly. Hey, so, I maybe said something to him. Gwen turned. To who? Britt pointed at me with her glass. Gwen's face changed, not dramatically. Just a small shift around the eyes, the kind that happens when something moves faster than expected. What did you say? The window thing. Gwen put down the dish towel she was holding. Britt. I know. I told you that when I was tired and honest. Yes, I know. You told me not to say anything. So, why? Because it's been 2 years and you're still going on 1 dinner dates with perfectly nice men and coming home and texting him about them. Britt set her glass down. That seems like relevant information for the person receiving the texts. The kitchen was very quiet. I had been standing by the sink and I had not moved. Gwen had turned toward me now, and she was looking at me with its expression I didn't have a clean name for. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Something more like someone who had been carrying something heavy and had just been seen doing it. The window thing, I said. It was not a question. Gwen let out a slow breath. My apartment faces west. I know which direction your apartment faces. Then you probably know what Britt is implying. I'm not implying, Britt said helpfully. I'm stating. Gwen pointed at the door. Go check on the fire pit. I want to see how this. Britt. She took her glass and left. She was not subtle about it. She paused in the doorway for 1 full second before going, which was exactly her personality. And then it was just me and Gwen in the kitchen that I probably knew as well as my own by now. She leaned back against the counter. She did the thing I recognized, where she looked at a middle point in the room instead of directly at me. Which meant she was buying herself a second to figure out what she actually wanted to say. I didn't think she'd tell you that, Gwen said finally. What exactly is the full version? She looked up. You want the full version. I want whichever version is true. She laughed. But there was no lightness in it. It was the kind of laugh that meant the other option was something harder. The full version is that I compare how I feel around you to how I feel around everyone else. And it's not a fair comparison. Because nothing is going to feel like this. She gestured between us. A small, tired gesture. Nothing feels easy the way this feels easy, she said. And I know that sounds like a lot to put on a friendship. But I go on dates, and I'm performing. I'm doing the thing where you show interest, and ask the right questions and laugh at the right moments. And then I come home, and I text you about it. And that part is the part that feels real. Which is, she stopped. A fairly obvious sign, I realize. I had about 6 things I wanted to say and I couldn't locate any of them. You could have told me, I said. Which was not one of the 6 things, but it came out. So could you? I went still. She looked at me. You're not as unreadable as you think you are. I never said anything. No. But you stayed. She pushed off from the counter and folded her arms, not defensively, more like she needed something to do with her hands. You stayed through the 1 dinner date stories. You stayed through the guy last spring, who I thought might be something, and then wasn't. You stayed through my mom's health scare and my work stuff, and the 3 months I was a nightmare to be around. You stayed and you showed up at every family thing you didn't have to come to. I wanted to come, I know. Her voice was quieter now. That's the thing I kept trying not to think about too clearly. Because, if I thought about it too clearly, I'd have to do something about it. I looked at the floor for a moment. There was a small scuff mark near the base of the island that I'd noticed before and never mentioned. That's the kind of detail you only know about a place you've spent real time in. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be the guy who makes everything about his feelings. I said, "You're one of the most important people in my life." Every time I thought about saying something, I thought about what happened if I was wrong. What it would do to this. I thought the same thing. I looked up. She met my eyes and didn't look away. I thought about it every time too. What if I'm reading something that isn't there? What if he sees me differently after? What if we try and it doesn't work and I lose the person I call when something good happens? Her chin lifted slightly. So I said nothing. And you said nothing. And here we are in my parents' kitchen at 11:30. I let out a breath. At least there's leftover cake. That got a real smile. Small but real. Write in the comments, she said, her voice dropping into something drier. Was it worth the 2 years of saying nothing? Or did we just waste time being careful? I laughed despite myself. I know what the comments are going to say. They're going to say we were idiots. We were a little bit idiots. Very loyal idiots, she said, and something in the tension in her face eased just slightly. We were protecting the same thing, from opposite sides. She nodded. The kitchen hummed around us. The refrigerator, a distant sound from the fire pit outside, the specific quiet of a house that had held a party and was now recovering from one. Britt appeared in the doorway holding a paper plate with 2 brownies on it. Emotional support, she said. I come in peace. Gwen put her hand over her eyes. I timed it well, Britt said. I can tell because neither of you is crying or hugging, which means I have arrived in the gap between the hard part and the hard part and the part where things get better. She held out the plate. Brownie? I took one. Traitor, Gwen said. The brownie or me? Both. Britt set the plate on the counter and backed away. I'm going back to the fire pit. Take your time. No pressure. Also, you're welcome. She paused. I'm saying you're welcome in advance, for the record. Get out, Gwen said. But she was trying not to smile. Britt left. This time she didn't pause in the doorway. Gwen picked up the second brownie and held it for a second without eating it. She's going to be insufferable. She was already insufferable. She's going to be, specifically, insufferable about this. Probably for years, I agreed. Gwen was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't want to stand in this kitchen pretending I didn't say what I said. That feels worse than having said it. I know. So, she looked at me. Not performing anything now. Just looking. What do we do? I had thought about this moment. Not planned it, not scripted it, but held it somewhere in the back of my head, the way you hold something fragile. You're not sure you'll ever actually pick up. I had thought about what I would say if it were ever actually real, not hypothetical, and in every version of it, I managed to be calm and clear and say the right thing. Instead, what came out was, I'd like to stop driving 40 minutes home at midnight, telling myself that being your friend is enough. Gwen looked at me for a long second. Then she said, okay, yeah, okay. Okay, I'm also done pretending that's enough. She set the brownie down. I've been done for a while. I moved around the edge of the island. Not rushed, not a movie moment, just closing the distance that had been between us for longer than it needed to be. I should have said something a year ago, I said. You probably should have. You could have, too. I absolutely could have. She looked up at me, and there it was. Not the careful version she usually showed in situations that felt like too much, but the real one. Tired and honest and relieved. We're both terrible at this. We really are. She reached up and fixed the collar of my jacket. Not because it needed fixing. It was just something her hands did when she was close to me, some habit she'd built without naming it. I'd noticed it for years. I'd never said anything. I said something now. I'm going to remember that you just did that. She looked at her own hands like she'd caught herself. Muscle memory. 7 years of muscle memory. Don't read into it. I'm reading into it. Her expression did something complicated, and then settled into a smile that was quieter than her usual ones. More real. The kind she didn't hand out to rooms full of people. I kissed her. I didn't make a production of it. I just did it the way I should have done things with her, years ago. Directly. Without hedging. Without giving myself time to talk myself back into being careful. Her hand came up to the front of my jacket and held on. And I felt every stupid year of saying nothing, break apart, and leave. When we stepped back, she kept her forehead near mine for a second. We're going to hear about this forever, she said. Brit's going to get a plaque made. She's going to want to be the maid of honor before we've been on a single date. Let's go on the date first. Yes, Gwen said. Let's do that. We told Brit on the way out to the fire pit. We didn't have to tell her anything, actually. She took one look at our faces and stood up off her camp chair and said, I'd like to thank the Academy. And Neil threw a marshmallow at her. Gwen's mom saw us standing close together when she came out to collect cups, and she didn't say anything. She just patted my arm on the way past, the same way she always did, except this time, it felt less like warmth, and more like an acknowledgement. Like she had been waiting to give it a reason. I drove home an hour later, not at midnight, later than that, because neither of us had been in any hurry for the night to end. 6 weeks after the party, Gwen's dad called me to ask how things were going. Not with work. With Gwen. He said he'd had money on Thanksgiving, and he was disappointed he'd lost to his wife, who had bet on the summer. I told him I didn't know they'd had a bet. He said they'd had several bets, going back quite a while, and that he hoped I understood. They were rooting for us. I told him I did. He told me not to drive 40 minutes home from his house anymore without telling his daughter how I felt about things. I told him I didn't plan to. We went on a first date to a place she'd mentioned once, 7 months earlier, that she'd wanted to try. I'd written it down in my phone under her name because I did things like that without thinking about why. She noticed when we walked in. She looked at me sideways across the table and said, How long have you had that reservation? 2 weeks. I said, You planned this. I had 7 years of data on what you'd like. She shook her head, but she was smiling the whole way through dinner. The real one. Not the party version. I stopped driving home from her life and started staying in it.